Alright lads, so today we got some pretty exciting news regarding the next character coming our way in Bleach, so Resonance, that being a Thrust Tactic Nelliel. She's scheduled to release in a week's time on the 20th of February, and with that we do finally have information regarding her entire kit. For the most part, we know exactly how she is going to play. We don't know the damage numbers, so we can't say right now whether this character is going to hit hard or be weak, but I think based on the data mine stuff that we do have right now, she is going to be a pretty powerful character. So with that said, first up, let's talk about the character's core passive effect. I think it's better to start off with the passive effects, and then we'll go look at each individual attack. So her core passive is going to be inflicting corrosion. Corrosion is going to be, I assume, her ailment that she can inflict. And dealing ailment damage applies 1 stack of corrosion mark on an enemy. Each mark reduces the enemy's ailment resistance by a certain percentage for X amount of seconds, stacking up to X amount of times. Again, unfortunately, we don't know the specific numbers regarding a lot of these effects, so there's still more to know about Nelliel, but already as a core passive, this is really powerful, especially for a character like Kenpachi and also Gin, as those characters also want to inflict ailments. Lowering the resistance means those ailments can be more powerful, so we're off to a good start thus far. With that, having a look at her passive boost, her first passive is going to increase the amount of damage that corrosion can inflict. We see this quite often on characters that can inflict ailments, so a pretty standard passive here. Her second passive is, while the shield from return state exists, Nelliel's attack is increased by a certain percentage. Now, when you see return state mentioned, I'm pretty sure this refers to her in her transformed state, her resurrection. So keep that in mind anytime return state is mentioned. Essentially, when she is in her transformed state, she's going to get a shield, potentially decreasing the damage that she can take, but also gaining an attack percentage. Hopefully it's relatively high. And then her third passive boost is, when attacking enemies afflicted by an ailment, her critical rate of the attack is going to be increased. So it's not a direct critical rate increase, but for that specific attack, when the enemy is inflicted by an ailment, you are going to be having a better chance to hit criticals. Any type of crit rate is always a good thing in my opinion, so I am liking the passive that she does have right now. So with that in mind, let's go over her basic attack, Rational Blades. Nelliel swings her Zanpakuto toe, dealing 5 hits totaling a certain percentage of her attack, and also triggering corrosion a certain number of times, while of course also accumulating her own battlefield skill and also battlefield skill energy. Now I really hope I'm not wrong here, but I'm pretty sure this is the first tactic character that can gain spiritual pressure before transforming. I believe only Byakuya has a spiritual pressure gauge once he does transform into his Bankai state. So that's actually good for her because it means an extra attack that she can deal. But with that, on her 5th hit, you will gain a certain number of combat will and a certain number of friendship points. Now we'll talk about more of those in a minute when it comes to her battlefield skill. But I'll say right now, I believe her friendship points is in regards to the attack that she can do with Don the Tracker and also Pesce. With that though, Nelliel does have a special attack, so I can only assume this will be when her spiritual pressure is maxed. Nelliel leaps above the enemy to strike, dealing a certain number of attack damage, and also once more triggering corrosion a certain number of times, while also of course gaining combat will and also friendship points. But interestingly enough, she does heal the entire team equal to her attack by a certain percentage and an additional certain percentage. So this is very similar to Kisuke's crit damage boost on the ultimate, but I'm really liking the idea that we finally have a damage dealing character that can also heal the entire team. This is going to make it a really good support, and right now, off the top of my head, can be pretty good for a character like Kenpachi, who his gameplay is kind of forced to take damage. If you are going to use Nelliel with Kenpachi, I think right now that heal aspect is going to be really good. And what I'm also really liking here is that it is tied behind her attack stat. So naturally, you're going to be increasing her attack stat to deal more damage, but at the same time, you're also going to be increasing the amount of heals that she can give to the entire team. So big fan of that special attack. But it also does mention here at the bottom, when her battlefield skill is active, the last hit of this attack within 8 seconds automatically triggers an ally's counterattack on switching, with damage and the SP reduction efficiency being reduced by a certain percentage. So this is pretty much the exact same as Aizen, where he can allow his allies to switch in and instantly trigger a counterattack. It does deal less damage, and it does reduce their spiritual pressure bar, the enemies, by a certain amount. So it's not nearly as good as a full counter. But if any character has a special effect by countering, it's really good for them. Again, right now, off the top of my head, Gin, Kenpachi, and likely Grimmjow in the future. So really good thus far. I do like that she has a special attack for her basic attack combo. Following up with that, we do have her technique, Swift Slash. Nelliel performs 2 slashes, followed by a strong kick, dealing a certain percentage of her attack and triggering corrosion X amount of times, while also accumulating her own spillage pressure and also battlefield skill energy. Potentially what we are seeing here, especially with the fact that she does have her own spillage pressure meter, her own special attack, is that despite it being a tactic unit, she might actually have a lot of screen presence, which for her case might actually be a good thing. Upon release though, you will instantly gain a certain number of combat will and also again friendship points. Going into her ultimate, Sing Antelope Knight. Nelliel unleashes her Zampa Toe to transform into the Antelope Knight form. I believe, again, this is going to be called the Return State. Either term works here, I believe. And chants at the target, dealing a certain percentage of her attack, triggering corrosion X amount of times. After the transformation, all of her attacks are enhanced and she gains Steel Body, which is a shield equal to a certain percentage of her attack, plus an additional percentage, so she is going to be quite the safe character, gaining essentially damage reduction. We're seeing elements of Orihime's effects where she can provide shield and also heals onto a potential damage dealing character. But keep in mind, while you are transformed, the battlefield skills Combo Attack and Fusion Flash cannot be activated during this state. So what exactly is Nelliel's battlefield skill? Because right now she does have access to 3 different battlefield skills. For starters, like we already knew yesterday, when her battlefield skill is active, all allies gain a certain percentage of element mastery. This is really good for her and any character in the team that wants to inflict element damage. So again, Kenpachi and also Gin. What this also does mean, despite it being a Frost type character, she likely isn't going to be restricted to Frost type teams. You can potentially use her alongside Kenpachi. You can potentially use her alongside Grimmjow because he also wants to inflict element damage. And any future character that can inflict element damage and wants more element mastery is going to be really good paired with Nelliel. I really like the idea of this because, like we spoke about in the past, due to this game's limited number of types and roles, it would kind of suck if every character is just restricted to being used in a monotyping team. So I'm really liking this encouragement of building non-monotyping teams, a team that consists of a Frost character, a Slash character, and a Strike character, for example. You really can use Nelliel with any character you want, but as you'll see later, of course, she does make Frost teams a little bit better. Regardless though, her battlefield skill does have 2 types of energy, battlefield skill energy and friendship points, corresponding to combat attack and also fusion flash. Both are gained through Nelliel's attacks within 0.2 second cooldown. So firstly, her combo attack. When other allies' attacks hit enemies, they automatically consume a certain number of battlefield skill energy and trigger Nelliel's combo attack, dealing a certain percentage of attack and also applying more corrosion. So this is very similar to Uryu. For example, when you are using him, while attacking, he would join the field and deal an additional attack. Nelliel seems to be very similar, although in this case, it does seem to consume battlefield skill energy. So you do need to have a certain number of battlefield skill energy for her combo attack to even apply, but this is going to be an automatic attack, right? But in addition to that, if the enemy is hit again within 2 seconds by another element damage, an extra combo attack is triggered without consuming any battlefield skill energy. I believe it does say SP here, but I assume it would consume battlefield skill energy here. And each trigger grants additional friendship points. So our second, or I guess in this case, third battlefield skill, which is Fusion Flash, can only be used once you do have 15 points of friendship. And in this case, Pesce and Don the Chaka appear and perform a Fusion Flash in front of Nelliel, also dealing X amount of attack damage. So we have seen thus far that she does have 2 battlefield skills. I believe her first one is going to be her just doing a Ssr. The Fusion Flash, which you can only do while having 15 friendship points, will likely deal more damage, and Pesce and Don the Chaka will appear in that animation. And then she has an additional battlefield skill, which is more automatic with her just appearing on the field, dealing additional damage. So if we ever do continue to see friendship points or combo attack in this character's kit, it is referring to her 2 different types of battlefield skills. But like already shown, once this character does use her ultimate, she will transform into a Resurrection state. In this case, the attacks do change briefly. For starters, her basic attack swings her lance, dealing 5 hits in total, while also of course triggering corrosion, but the 5th hit does grant combat will. Right now, really not sure what combat will is going to be, but that's an additional effect that she will apply. And then additionally, she does have a special attack. In this case, she swings her lance, jumps, pins the enemy, and detonates, dealing X amount of attack damage and once more triggering corrosion, while gaining more combat will and healing the allies by a certain percent. So very similar to her basic form essentially. But in this case, if her spiritual pressure is maxed, triggers 1 extra normal attack after the last hit. Just extra damage, I guess. As for her technique, Nelliel throws a lance at the enemy, dealing X amount of attack damage and once more applying corrosion. However, in this case, unlike her basic form, she does have an additional technique, Verdant Spin, which you can only use after using her first technique. So in a way, you can think of it as a follow-up attack, and this is actually where combat will is going to come in effect. If she has 2 or more combat will, you then can use this additional technique to deal more damage, which in this case, she teleports next to the enemy, draws her lance, and thrusts again, dealing more attack damage. Once more, also applying corrosion. Like stated here, the skill will consume 2 combat will and increase the cooldown of the normal attack by a certain amount, and after casting this second skill, Verdant Spin, it will chain directly into the 4th hit of the normal attack. And remember, going back to this character's basic attack, the final hit does grant combat will. So you're consuming 2 combat will to get this second attack off, but can instantly follow that up with the final hit of her basic attack to get more combat will. Even though right now we can't see any damage numbers, I'm really liking how this character can play. It seems like her transformed state and her non-transformed state play a lot different. One has access to an extra battlefield skill. The extra attacks, the Don the Chaka and Pesce attack, while the transformed state gets to use 2 techniques, while of course likely being able to use her normal Ssr battlefield skill. After that though, we do have Nelliel's enhanced ultimate when she is resurrected, where in this case Nelliel concentrates her spiritual pressure and throws her lance at the enemy, dealing an X amount of attack damage. Casting this skill ends the return state and sets battlefield skill energy to maximum. So you do actually de-transform back to her normal state essentially, but I really do like the idea that her battlefield skill is set to max. I think that's going to be a great quality of life that doesn't seem to be tied behind duplicates luckily. And while Nelliel's battlefield skill is active, for 8 seconds after this attack hits, switching to an ally automatically triggers an ally's counterattack. So another way for allies to get counters off. Do like the idea of that. So our gameplay right now, despite us, seeing snippets of it, does seem pretty powerful. Going over some miscellaneous stuff, in this case, going back to her non-transformed state, her counter does once more apply corrosion, does gain spiritual pressure and battlefield skill energy, but also lets you chain that directly into the 4th hit of the normal attack so you can get more combat will. But also, on a successful counter, you do instantly gain a certain number of combat will and also friendship points. So, very good to hit counters with this character. Right now, despite it being a tactic character, I'm sensing a lot of on-field presence. She really doesn't seem like she wants to be in the backlines, but honestly, she can. So this would just be ultimately more way to build combat will. And then while in her transform state, it does seem to be the exact same. But interestingly enough, while in her transformed resurrection state, you can manually activate her counter by just holding down the counter button, which will consume a certain number of combat will. So you have an additional way, I guess, to play the character if you do want to manually activate her counter. Not sure if you would want to do that, but it doesn't seem like there's a direct negative by doing this besides just consuming combat will. But this might actually be a decent way to lower the enemy's spiritual pressure bar, for example. Continuing on with the information that we do have here, next up we have her weapon stamp and also core stamp. Firstly, her weapon stamp. The number of directly triggered corrosion procs and the efficiency of applying the corrosion value are increased by 50%. The maximum number of corrosion marks are now increased to 20. So overall, with the weapon stamp, easier to inflict corrosion, you inflict it faster, it deals more damage, and you also can inflict more corrosion. Secondly, the damage of all skills and battlefield skills is increased by 50%, so overall more damage. And when the battlefield skill Fusion Flash, this is the one with Don the Chaka and Pesce, it will additionally trigger 1 more corrosion, and the base damage of this corrosion is equal to 300% of Nelliel's attack. However, for each different element status previously triggered on the enemy, this damage is doubled up to a maximum of 8 times. Really liking this weapon stamp, and for the most part, it seems like you are encouraged to really get off that Fusion Flash, which again, you can only do in the base form. But whenever you do get this attack off, which hopefully isn't too hard to pull off, considering you do need 15 friendship points, Nelliel will overall be just dealing more damage with that extra corrosion. And then Nelliel's core stamp increases her ultimate damage by 30%. And while in return state, which again, I'm pretty sure is her transformed resurrection state, each 1 point of combat will consumed increases the damage of her ultimate by 5%, stacking up to 9 times. That feels relatively on the low end, Maybe by comparing it to Kenpachi, for example, he can go up to 100%, but that's specifically through his actual gameplay, so maybe 5% is fine. Although I do feel like it's stacking up to 9 times is a bit of a weird number. But then again, her ultimate is naturally increased by 30%, so I guess you can increase her ultimate up to 75%. With that, Element Mastery is also increased by 20%, so overall more damage on her elements, specifically in this case corrosion. And enemies hit with her ultimate, Verdant Lance, are inflicted with armor break for 30 seconds, reducing their frost resistance by 15%. Which unfortunately, this effect does not stack. So out of the entire kit thus far, that is the first thing she has in her entire kit where she has anything related to a certain typing, in this case frost resistance. So just based on the kit thus far, which does cover most of her right now, she really does seem to be a universal character, a character that doesn't need to just be used with frost characters. Which I think is a good thing, and right now we are 2 for 2 with limited time tactic units, Aizen and now Nelliel, that seem to be just really good with any character, regardless of their typing. Aizen does offer more spirit damage, technically, and likewise here, through the core stamp, you do get a bit more frost damage, but I'd say this is more so for her than the actual team itself. But to be fair, if you are using it with Gin, Gin will now be dealing more damage alongside Nelliel. And last but not least, let's talk about Nelliel's boundary ascensions. So her first boundary, her first duplicate, upon casting Ultimate Sing Antelope Knight, this is when you transform into a Resurrection, immediately gain free combat will. That sounds pretty good, and each time any battlefield skill is cast, Nelliel gains Judgment for 2 seconds, increased in all battlefield skill damage by 50%. All allies also deal increased frost damage by 20%. So now we're seeing more frost damage effects, specifically in this case through her first duplicate. That overall does seem really good. More team effects for her team and also more damage for herself, making her rotation much easier, especially with the added free gains of combat will. Her second duplicate, while in return state, casting skill Verdant Spin. So her technique, special attacks, or the last hit of the counter attack, you do gain 1 stack of harass per cast, and each stack increases the critical damage for the entire team by 20% for 15 seconds up to a maximum of 4. So potentially 80% crit damage seems absolutely insane. Right now, for me, I've not really summoned for any duplicates, but this seems to be a really good duplicate. Her fourth duplicate, when an ally casts a counter attack, Nelliel's crit rate is increased by 20%, and her crit damage is increased by 40% for 10 seconds. I think it's a bit awkward because an ally has to inflict the counter and then you have to instantly switch into Nelliel. So what happens if I counter with Nelliel, switch into Gin, I then have to switch back into Nelliel to get that 20% crit rate and crit damage for 10 seconds? That seems like a very awkward B4, I will be honest. However, her final duplicate sounds kind of crazy. When casting the first ultimate Verdant Lance in return state, the return state will not end, and her combat will is immediately restored to its maximum. So this is quite an insane final duplicate. What this does mean is that once you do use your ultimate, you don't de-transform. You will stay in her resurrection state at least for the very first use of her ultimate. And since you gain extra combat will, that means you're free to use her enhanced technique multiple times. So in a way, you're not really punished for being in that transform state. So I'm really liking the idea of that final duplicate. Unfortunately, I won't be able to use that, but it does sound actually pretty good. But with that said, lads, that's the video for today, going over the new data mined information regarding Nelliel. Like I said, stuff could change. We are very close to her release, so likely this will be like 90% accurate. Some things might change, but I'm pretty certain what we see here is what we are going to see on release in a week's time. Nelliel looks to be an absolutely amazing character. Whether you have a B0 or B6, she's going to be an absolute beast and seems to pair well with any character you want to put her against, assuming they can inflict element damage. So Kenpachi, Gin, and again, hopefully, Grimmjow. This definitely increases my excitement for Nelliel. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, and peace.